Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is David Sembeck, Lead Industry and Service Officer from the Asian Productive Organization. Thank you for joining our Productivity Talk today. I would like to introduce Ms. An-Ting Liu from the Republic of China, Taiwan, who is the founder and board chair of Teach for Taiwan. Hello, An-Ting. Thank you for giving your valuable time to our viewers today.
Thank you, David, and thank you for our viewers for tuning in.
An-Ting Liu is the founder and board chair of Teach for Taiwan, an NGO that has placed hundreds of Taiwanese youth in rural areas to address inequalities in Taiwan's education system. Since 2013, TFT has served over 5,000 students, with alumni of the program going on to become leaders in education, social innovation, and politics. TFT has been dubbed Taiwan's most influential educational NGO of this generation. In addition to her work with the TFT, An-Ting was invited last year to create School 28, a new organization to cultivate the impact talent in Taiwan. She also co-created Education CoLab, an MPO office focused on educational innovation that was recognized by President Tsai. She sits on multiple NGO boards and serves as advisor to Taiwan's National Development Council. She studied international public affairs in Princeton University with a focus on education and policy international development. She was named to Forbes 30 Under 30 list in 2016. She was recently listed as being among 30 entrepreneurs in Taiwan to know in 2021 by Business Weekly. You can also watch her story at TEDx Taipei titled Connecting My Purpose with My Past. It was broadcast in 2016, May 14th.
Great. Thank you for creating the video.
An-Ting, I can see that President Tsai visited Education CoLab on March 2nd, 2021.
Yes.
Maybe you can share why she visited Education CoLab and what significance it has.
So yes, President Tsai graciously visited our newly created Education CoLab in March this year. And I appreciated the visit both as an individual, also as an organizational leader, but also as just a member of our generation. So individually, I think President Tsai had a special connection to me because she, even before she became a presidential candidate, was an individual donor to, at that time, in 2013, was just a young, naive girl with some idealistic, bold ideas. And she, as an individual, was in attendance of some of my earlier events and talks and offered a personal support to us. So personally, I appreciated that she had, in such a long period of time, sustained that support as an individual, as a female role model for us as well. As an organizational leader, I think it's especially special because what we are doing in the nonprofit sector always have in mind what it means for the greater society. So of course, it has a lot of implications and connection to a public policy maker and how do we interact with the education system as a civil society member and also as a citizen ourselves. So I think as an organizational leader, I was particularly happy that President Tsai was willing to make the visit, which symbolized, I think, a deeper connection between the public sector and the civil society organizations, particularly one that's led by the younger generation. So finally, as a member of our generation, I think it is very gratifying, I think, for me and my colleagues to see our work recognized by a leader of our island, of our society, of our country, and to see that even as a younger person, we had the ability to dream bigger, to achieve accomplishments that are meaningful to our society, and that we can do intergenerational collaboration in an impactful way. And so I think as a member of our generation, I'm particularly proud of what we've accomplished approximately in the past decade or so. So that's my take from the significance of the visit. Yeah.
Maybe you can explain a little bit about the Teach for Taiwan.
Mm-hmm. Yes, to explain our work. in short, we believe that we can cultivate collective leadership to accomplish the mission of eliminating education inequality in Taiwan. And how does that work? I think in the video you could see that we have a core fellowship of 2 years where we recruit top talent from all walks of different professions. Some of them were local residents. Some of them were engineers, designers, medical doctors. Some of them are academics. They come together through this fellowship. Through 2 years' time, on the one hand, they learn to be of value as a teacher to rural high-need schools, which usually have difficulty recruiting for quality teaching force. On the other hand, they also themselves as individuals develop as an impactful leader who are locally rooted and internationally connected. So we do believe that in becoming a better teacher, you are at the same time becoming a better leader, because what a teacher does every day, I think, is the greatest act of leadership. You understand the team, the students, the parents, the community, other teachers, your principals. You connect with them, you empathize with them, and together you present a vision for a better tomorrow that really motivates the entire team. And then you have the execution and you have the resource to really make meaningful change happen. That's what a teacher does on a daily basis, and that's what a leader does for the greater society as well. So we do believe that teaching is leadership, and we believe through teaching we are cultivating important leaders who go on to be our alumni. Some of them who stay as teachers, some of them become principals, some of them become leaders in social innovation, policy, in academia, etc. And now in our 8th year, we have an alumni network of more than 200 alumni, and the number is growing very quickly. We are hoping that these leaders, in connection with other important stakeholders in the society, can together bring systematic change to the education inequity that we are seeing in Taiwan and the rest of the world, really. So we, in conclusion, want to bring a systematic solution to a systematic issue, and that solution being collective leadership.
Although education is so important and fundamental, it is difficult to see the outcome, output, and impact right away. Mm-hmm. That can sometimes be frustrating. So what motivates you to continue this journey?
I think all meaningful change, whether in education or elsewhere, they take a long time. So I think patience is a critical attribute to any leader. But I would add that it's a sort of urgent patience that our leaders that we're cultivating really tend to hold really dear to their work. Urgent patience means that on the one hand, you understand the urgency for change. Every day you're motivated by that urgency. You see the need, you see the consequences for the lack of change. So you continue to hold on to that urgency. At the same time, you have the patience rooted in the understanding that meaningful change don't come easily. And especially in the education, it is very much like farming. You plant the seeds, and you provide it with the right environment and right nutrients. And still you have a lot of unknown situations that you have to deal with, difficulties and challenges. And it's only through such a long laboring process that eventually you bear fruit. So I think that the patience, it's rooted in understanding that the wait is part of the leadership journey. And at the same time, there are steps that we can measure. Is not as if we only believe in long-term change, that we in the short term do not measure meaningful progress. We do, actually. We try to find meaningful measurements that would help us gauge whether or not we're on the right path, whether we need to make just adjustments to our strategies and actions. But that patience is very much still rooted in our belief for long-term systematic and meaningful change. So that's what motivates us, I think, that urgent patience in our leadership journey.
Was there any time that when you almost wanted to give up? If so, how did you manage to rebound?
Yeah, if my answer to that question is no, I never wanted to give up, I feel like that would make me kind of inhumane almost. I think it's human to want to give up at difficult times. I think it's human to really see your limits when you bring yourself up against such a big issue that's much, much larger than any individual. I think it's only normal. So there are so many moments. If I could show you my diary, there are so many moments, big or small ones, that as an individual, really, it would have felt much easier and brought more immediate comfort to my own individual life if I had, in a way, chosen to have given up. But I think in those moments, what kept me going really is my community. I think I am so fortunate and privileged in the secure knowledge that I have never been in this work alone. I never had to accomplish any change or impact individually, because from the beginning, the issue is much larger than myself. And so whenever I feel like giving up, I have a community to fall back on. I have a community that is supportive, of community that's very understanding. And if there's anything that we have managed to accomplish in the past 8-9 years, it is through this community, not myself individually. And I think the concept of being in a community is so important, whether for a child or for an adult like myself, because I think that is how any individual really accomplish meaning in life, purpose in life, that is really larger than any of our individual paths. So I think that had really sustained me in difficult moments. I also had the fortune of working with professionals that offer me very practical tools, such as mental health professionals that have really brought my awareness, understanding of how to take care of my own mental health and how to support members of my community. I have also, I think, development coaches that have really, even in the most difficult moments, allow me the space and time to see what those moments mean for my own development as a leader as well. So I think those are very practical resources from my community that had really supported me so far.
What you are doing requires a skillful leadership. And how do you motivate youth in rural areas to learn? As we discussed, they cannot always see the benefits or results of education right away. As a leader, how do you inspire the ultimate beneficiaries?
You know, one of my favorite movies is called The King's Speech. I'm sure a lot of viewers have watched that Oscar-winning film. And in that film, one of the most memorable quotes for me, it says, the act of leadership, I might be paraphrasing, by the way, but it says something like, the act of leadership, the most difficult part of leadership is leading yourself day after day. And I think I bring that to my leadership role day after day, because I think the most challenging part of leadership is not some of the most obvious pieces where you see, oh, of course, in a leadership position, you need to make a strategic plan. You need to assemble a team. You need to manage for progress. You need to be data-driven, et cetera, et cetera. These are sort of the more obvious pieces of a person like me who are in a leadership position. But I think beyond that, what's even more important and inspirational to your question is how a leader picks him or herself up every single day in the face of immense challenges. And I think a leader can be human, a leader can be vulnerable, and that actually brings even more strength, I think, to a leader's inspiration and to what we call the beneficiaries. I see them as my community members who are collectively leading with me, and we mutually inspire each other because each of us lead ourselves to a better self day after day. And I think that's the piece of feedback that I continually hear from my team members, from my so-called beneficiaries, that they see me as a human, and that they see me in these difficult moments, and they see me as an individual as well, bring that strength to my own journey, which in turn inspire strength in their journeys as well. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. It's a little bit of an abstract answer, but I think it's really core to my philosophy of leadership. Just one final note, coming from that philosophy of leadership, which stems from leading oneself, I think practically it is very important for us to recognize the importance of diversity of talent, because in being vulnerable, a leader understands that no one individual is a superstar, superhero that is individually sufficient for solving any issue. So how to really assemble a team that is not to feed to a leader's ego, not to make a leader feel good about oneself, but to really see what kind of diverse talent that are needed for our greater mission. I think that's a key task for any leader, and a task that I place a lot of weight on for my own leadership journey too. So I'm proud to say if I had any accomplishment, one of the proudest accomplishments I had is building a team that's very diverse, whether you look at a gender perspective, whether you look from social economic background, whether you look from geographic representation, sexual orientation, religion, etc. From all these lenses, I'm truly proud to say that we together had assembled a diverse team, and diversity is our strength. Of course, diversity brings some challenges too, but as a team, we have placed a lot of resources and focus on overcoming those challenges and to really reap the benefits of our diversity. So that was my final note on my focus in my work as leadership, and hopefully that had brought some inspiration to our community as well.
As the founder and board chair of a Teacher for Taiwan, what are the most difficult areas in leading the organization?
For this question, I can go on for days. There are so many areas that I have found challenging. But if I can only name one, it's building a result-oriented and sustainable, accountable nonprofit organization of this generation. That had been challenging, because I think in Taiwan, maybe even in greater sort of East Asia, it's uncommon for talents to go into a nonprofit career. It is also uncommon in the past for a nonprofit organization to really see ourselves as accountable as maybe a corporate would see to its stakeholders, or maybe a public sector government agency would see to its constituents. I think in the past, we have sort of see nonprofit organizations in our culture as charity work, as goodwill, but not necessarily as a respectable career, or as accountable force in pushing for social change. And I think that's sort of been the most challenging, because we're doing something that even ourselves, we were never sure if we can succeed, but we do want to try to see if this form of organization could be beneficial to our society. So, I like what Bill Gates once said. He said, the role that he saw for philanthropy in this generation is to innovate where governments can't, and where corporates won't, which means, we go to corners of the society that are important, but where, a private sector player or a public sector player had limitations. That's where such an organization play a critical role in innovating and in really accelerating potential change solutions. And once we do find sustainable, scalable solutions, we then work closely with our public sector and private sector equal partners to really see how we replicate and how we really bring impactful change to a longer term future. So anyway, I think that's one of the biggest challenges to me in sketching up what would such an organization look like in our culture, in our generation, and how do I convince particularly young people who, in their existing mindsets and perhaps in their parents' mindsets had never considered such an organization or such a career path as one that's worth equal consideration as others that they are more familiar with. So I think mainstream value judgment and also just building an organization that nobody had really seen before in Taiwan concretely. And in the process, building trustful partnership with existing players. These are all critical challenges that come with building such an organization in the past 8 or 9 years.
Leading any organization is very challenging, whether it's private or public. For the nonprofit organizations, like funding is always challenging, and it can be one of the reasons why it cannot be easily sustainable. How do you resolve this challenging issue? What is your long-term plan for this?
Yeah, I think that's a question really for any organization, for-profit or nonprofit. How do we be sustainable? And I think for a nonprofit organization, our goal is not to continuously grow in size or resource. We continue to think about how do we best leverage limited resources in most impactful conjunctions and points. So for us, when we think about resources, we don't assume that it is an endless expansion that we need. We assume actually that as a nonprofit, there's an end game that we think about, whether for our solutions, the end game might be that we, if successful, need to replicate that through, as I said, public and private sector players. The end game might also be that this particular know-how or tool can then, if successful, be implemented through different organizations, not necessarily through ourselves. Our end game might also be that we are combining with existing funding resources, whether through public or private sector players, in shared goals that we share in resources in reaching for bigger collective goals, such as the SDGs. Companies and governments have allocated a lot of resources for achieving these goals. So we might not be in the end game looking for additional resources. We're looking at existing resources and only thinking about how do we better together implement and allocate these resources. To TFT, we don't necessarily fundraise just as a charity act. We actually think of our donors of any sort as a joint strategic partner or maybe an investor. When we look at our investment, we are now looking at an infinite number of input. We are looking at where will we invest to see most return in our role. And then we allocate and we seek the resources needed. I think the mindset is very much similar actually to any perhaps startup organization, business, or even government. We all have limited resources. The question is with allocation and implementation, right? So I think there is a paradigm shift in how we think about a sustainable NGO, where in the previous paradigm, we think about it through the charity lens, where it's only through people's additional goodwill that we're able to do some remedial work. But in our newer paradigm that we are attempting to work with, it is through perhaps I would call it more a philanthropy lens, where we look at it through investment calculation. We look at it not necessarily as remedial work, but we are trying to work together to problem solve, to create impact. So that creates different measurements, and that also creates different fundraising mechanisms and philosophies. So that's how, so far, we've managed to create a network of investors that I think are increasingly stable and are increasingly dedicated to our shared goals.
In the pandemic situation, we have faced a hard situation for education as well. In Taiwan, no doubt that you have same issue. So
Yes.
I've heard the students couldn't go to school for some time. So how did Teach for Taiwan respond to that suspension situation?
Well, Taiwan, through the pandemic had relatively been quite fortunate compared to most of the rest of the world. As people might know, the school system was running normally or as before up until mid-May this year. And because mid-May was already quite close to our summer vacation, which starts in July. So essentially, our school system was suspended for less than 2 months. And then schools were able to restart again as planned earlier in September this year. So I think, overall, the situation in Taiwan is fortunate in that sense. But you can also argue that the fortune could be a hurdle because compared to perhaps other countries who really felt that strong impetus to innovate, to respond to this new and unforeseen crisis, I think Taiwan, we were so comfortable for the most part that maybe compared to other places in the world, we didn't have as much energy and demand for innovation in the education system. So in answering your question, when the pandemic did hit Taiwan more severely in mid-May, and that all schools in Taiwan were suspended, we thought of our work at TFT through both the fortunate lens and the less fortunate lens. The fortunate lens thinking, we are fortunate in having to only deal with it in a relatively short period of time. So how do we make sure that in such a short period of time, our students don't fall through our support network, and that our students, if there's any internet issues, infrastructure issues, device issues, these are issues that should be solved very quickly. So through the fortunate lens, we made sure that TFT was a very efficient and speedy coordinator of resources. We ensure that all our students that we serve in these more remote, higher need areas had sufficient infrastructure, devices, Wi-Fi, and our teachers are supported with practical teaching tools and digital modules that quickly, with our CoLab neighbor, Junyi Academy, which is the biggest K-12 online learning platform in Taiwan, we quickly also put together resources for parents, for kids, for our teachers. So in a very efficient manner, within a week, all these resources were in place so that our students are at least starting at an equal starting point for this short period of suspension of school. So that's through the fortunate lens. And the other lens, what I call the less fortunate lens, which is thinking that, we're not only responding to it as if it's a crisis, we are embracing it because it could also be an opportunity. I call it the less fortunate lens because, that's what we seem to have lacked in our previous periods of comfort. And so now, we were less fortunate in that innovation momentum, but in mid-May, that momentum very much is there in Taiwan as well. So how do we really capitalize on that momentum and create something meaningful even beyond the suspension period? So we together, for example, we work with McKinsey, the leading consulting firm, on a pro bono project. We also work with our CoLab partners to think about post-COVID school delivery models that can really be high tech and high touch, We are not trying at all to eliminate the role of teachers, but how do we redesign the way that education is delivered in our public system, which essentially is a factory model that hadn't been changed since pretty much the Industrial Revolution. So how do we take this momentum as an opportunity to imagine a form of education delivery that's more suited for the future, for this digital generation? Yeah, so that's the second part where we are working deeply still until now with our private and public sector partners. And we already have a few lighthouse schools that in the school year are implementing new changes to their school design. And we're hoping that if successful, we can replicate that more quickly to other schools, and so that our remote schools can actually be lighthouses and exemplary demonstration of what future education could look like. So that's what we've been doing, the crisis mode and the longer term innovation mode.
We are aware that gender doesn't matter when it comes to leadership, but in reality, women leaders are facing more challenges, in my opinion. Maybe yes. I can be wrong, but could you share a story of a specific gender-related issue that you faced?
Again, Taiwan on the gender equality front, compared to a lot of the places in the world, are relatively fortunate. But the relatively fortunate position that I personally, for example, stand on today in Taiwan, for me is not something to be taken for granted, because as recent as my grandmother, who was born in the Japanese era in Taiwan, and then transitioned to our current Republic of China regime. I think in her journey, she was, for example, a particularly brilliant student in the Japanese school system. She was one of the few females at that time that were able to be accepted to a high school in Taiwan. At the time where Taiwanese students are considered secondary to Japanese students. So, there's the ethnic bias, there's also the gender bias. And she already was able to overcome a lot of the biases and hurdles. But still, when she was in the middle of high school, she wasn't supported by her family to finish her studies, because that was just considered not as valuable for investment in education for males. For her, even such a brilliant student, her family didn't see it as valuable enough, and society didn't approve of that, endorse that either. So she dropped out of school, and essentially, like many women of her generation, married very, very early, and took up a family role, a housewife for the rest of her career and life. And of course, being a housewife is a meaningful position, but for her particularly, if she had all the options in front of her, I don't think she would have selected being a lifelong housewife as her primary choice. Fast forward to me, as someone who is also growing up in Taiwan, I actually was accepted to the same high school that had accepted her 2 generations ago. At that time, there was no barrier that I could feel that would discourage me from going to school. There was even added encouragement from our teachers, who sometimes thought that female students are even better suited for academic studies. So that high school was all girls high school, who really helped girls, help us find our individual identities and career path. The issue of gender was never needed to be brought up, because it wasn't an obvious hurdle for any of us at that time. So, it's only perhaps a 50-year gap between my grandmother and me, but already 50 years later, the barriers that had been so heavy and so present in her life was not felt by me, at least until I was 18, right? So I think that's something that not to be taken for granted, because there have been so many advocates, so many sacrifices that have been made, so that I, like my generation in Taiwan, can enjoy a lot of the equalities in our gender. But still, of course, there are a lot of room for improvement. For example, as new mother, my kid is turning 2 next month. So I'm a new mother who are like all new mothers struggling with some of the physical roles that my husband cannot share even if he wanted to. So for example, when I was breastfeeding my kid, how does that practically work with my career? At that time was right around the time when the New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern was breastfeeding her child in the UN Assembly, and that created a lot of debate around the world. And these situations in a more micro moment way is very present in my daily life as well. Should a leader be breastfeeding in a conference room at the same time? Should a new mother be supported with flexible time and working locations? Even in Taiwan, these are still topics for debate. So at least for Teach for Taiwan, personally, I aim to create inclusive environment that would make either gender or maybe people from different sexual orientations all feel included and supported. We're not perfect at all, but we continuously identify these issues that are preventing perhaps the female gender from equal opportunities for career development. And we support even females who elect to leave perhaps her professional role for a period of time and then planning to come back. We even think of different options for different females because I think different females have different priorities. So it would be I think repeating past mistakes to assume a one-size-fits-all solution for all females as well. So we think of it as a cross-gender issue, even for our male counterparts. They're very integral to the discussion of equality as well. So they would receive some support as needed for their own particular phase of life or a particular role in the family. Right. So I think newer generation organizations in Taiwan, like ourselves, are, I think, fortunate to have the awareness and the encouragement to really be even more progressive in thinking of these different support mechanisms. But even us, we have a long way to go. So we count our fortune, but we also understand that there's a lot of challenges ahead of us that require support from even our international partners as well. But we in Taiwan, I think finally we take pride in being an inclusive democratic society, one that particularly represents a Chinese-speaking population, in our freedom, in our equality, in our inclusiveness. And I think that in and of itself is such an important education to not just our children, but to our greater society and region, that in what we're doing, we're demonstrating a more ideal future for ourselves and for our children to come.
So when you teach young people in rural areas, how do you approach gender equality? Do you have an overall philosophy for empowering female students or beneficiaries in rural areas?
I think adding on to what I just said, I think in Taiwan, we are quite fortunate in our generation that obvious gender inequality is not as prevalent as nearly before. So we don't necessarily have a particular mechanism to ensure gender equality. However, our goal is to create an inclusive education environment that includes genders that might be overlooked, underestimated in some situations, but it also includes, children from different ethnicities. In Taiwan, a lot of people don't know that we have, I think the latest number is 1 in every 7 school children who have at least one parent coming from Southeast Asia. And we also, of course, have our Aboriginal population, and new, more generically, new immigrants in Taiwan. And through our curriculum, through our pedagogies, how do we ensure that children from different social economic backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds, children from different genders or sexual orientations are all included in the classrooms and the schools. So I think inclusiveness is a goal that we work towards. not necessarily inclusiveness only focused on gender. And of course, that's where we're really fortunate. But inclusiveness includes a lot of different dimensions. I briefly touched on curriculum as well. It used to be, I think in the past, a curriculum that is through the lens of maybe a particular ethnicity. There's, I think, more thought now in our new curriculum put into how do we include different perspectives in narrating our history, for example, in our language education, for example. I think these are all important endeavors to ensure inclusiveness. Pedagogy as well. How do we personalize using our digital tools, especially to ensure that there is no student marginalized or ignored in the classrooms. I think there's a lot to be talked about. Differentiated teaching, high-tech, high-touch teaching methods. These are all different routes that TFT are working towards. But through gender and through other lenses, we do hope, along with our society, to promote more inclusivity in education and elsewhere as well.
So I would like to ask you about the positive versus negative reinforcement. So how do you balance the two as a leader? When you see that a staff or students are not doing well, which type of reinforcement do you use mostly?
I don't necessarily see this as a dichotomy, of either bad or positive or negative reinforcements. I think of it as more of a holistic approach, and particularly as an education organization. How do we approach our staff? Should be in alignment with how we approach our students, because, as you said, learning or education is not something that ends just within school peripheries. It's something that's continual. And how do we, as an organization, really be a learning organization? And how do we apply what makes a good teacher to being a good manager, being a good leader as well? So the same question if you ask a teacher, how do you balance positive and negative reinforcement in your classrooms? I think a mature teacher would tell you as well that this is not a dichotomy. I think, of course, there is individualization for different students, but there's also a belief, a growth mindset that this particular student can do it. It's a mindset of not yet, rather than, a definition of a more, stable idea, static idea of what this person is or will become. So a teacher would tell you to ensure that the student really learn to be a more mature person on his or her own, a mature learner. Not only positive or negative reinforcements, but also how do we help them see the reasoning behind these reinforcements? How do we allow them to have internal motivation to better oneself rather than only external reinforcements? Because I think particularly in maybe Asian education systems, in the past, there's a lot of emphasis on external reinforcement, on teaching one's behavior. But you might see that once these external reinforcements are removed in a real life situation, whether or not one person has the character and a stable value system to make the right judgment, to do the right things, that is not as predictable as when there is external reinforcements in place. And our goal, whether in an organization or in classrooms, is to really bring up mature individuals that would do the right thing, even when there is nobody watching, even when there is no external reinforcement, right? So I think as an organization, we focus a lot on development rather than just management. And in development, we talk with individuals as to how do they set their own learning goals, understand their learning maps, and along the map, what kind of reinforcement would be helpful in moving that forward. And of course, there are behaviors that in a professional organization that are not tolerated. Those would be clearly iterated at the beginning as organization culture and core values as well, so that if such non-tolerated behaviors do occur, there would not be news to the individual that he or she will receive negative reinforcement to that behavior. So I think it comes down to cultivating a culture with core values that really support the development, and with clear boundaries as to what is accepted and what is not accepted, and a belief, a growth mindset belief that every individual, adult or child, can achieve better, and can be growing if provided with the right environment and resources.
If you were starting today as a regular employee rather than as an executive leader, what are some of the difficulties you might face as a woman in climbing the organizational ladder?
I actually started my career as an entry-level consultant, analyst in a consulting company. So while I did not stay on that path, I think I had certainly thought of that question, and observed other female examples who also had experienced such challenges. And I think my first question, which was a question that was asked to me by a wise mentor at the time I was struggling as a first-year analyst, a female mentor said to me, the first question is to ask whether climbing up the ladder is really the most desirable thing in your case, because it's assumed that, higher up in the ladder is more desirable, but it might not be the right fit for every female. So for some, it might be, but for some others, for example, it's like juggling different balls, right? Compared to your career, there might also be other equally important or even more important things in your life. So how do you become clear on your priorities? I think in a progressive era, sometimes it's thought that a woman should lean in and always achieve for the highest career goals. For some women, that is the perfect fit. But for some others, there's absolutely no shame at all in choosing maybe, at least for some period of time, staying in the family because that's something that you prize, because that's something that you prioritize. So I think it would be a mistake in this more progressive era, to think that such women that choose to, in a way, for a period of time, deprioritize their career goals, it would be a mistake to think of them as less capable or less progressive or less successful. So it comes down to the choice of individual females or males. And if in that case, climbing up the ladder really is the right fit for such an individual, then we look at different organizations, industries, to really identify barriers. I know barriers vary a lot, industry by industry. For some industries, in education in Taiwan, for example, female leaders, I think, are quite common. So it's sometimes not about acquiring the position, but it is about fighting against more hidden stereotypes and biases in interacting with your male counterparts or superiors. So it's, for us, I think education is softer barriers that we're seeing on day to day. Acquiring the position, such as a principal or maybe a education bureau head, is already quite common for a female in Taiwan. But once in those positions, they constantly fight more, I think, underestimation, or maybe their behaviors are expected to be a certain way, or like females elsewhere, sometimes they are automatically thought of as more emotional or less stable, etc. So these are more hidden stereotypes and biases that I think we need to move forward in the female leaders in Taiwan education. But in some other industries, in finance or other more traditionally male sectors, I think it's not just about the softer pieces of fighting daily biases. It's simply about how do we, it's not simple, but it is about how do we really re-examine our mechanisms, such as our performance review mechanisms, such as our promotion decision mechanisms. Really take a hard look at these mechanisms and see where they can exclude our female talent in this, and making extra efforts in these industries to mentor them, and to create positions that would really be as a role model and example to other female younger talents who really can see that this is a viable route, encourage more of these talents to come into such industries and pursue such goals. And it's also about, I think, opinion leaders coming together to really put value on why it's not just a politically correct thing to do, why it benefits the organization and the business to really include these female talents in these positions. I think opinion leaders have a responsibility to really bring those values to be recognized, right? So I think in cases where climbing up the career ladder really is the right fit for the female, these are important actions to be taken. But at the same time, I won't spend time talking about the other options, but I do want to really emphasize that this might not be the right choice for every person, every male or female. So I think a lot of talents in Taiwan really seeing ourselves in a career that's not vertical, that's more maybe horizontal or diagonal. There's a lot of possible routes in addition to the vertical route that we are used to thinking of. There are a lot of different ways of creating one's meaningful, fruitful career. So how can we be creative as individuals to really think about what success means to us, not just following blindly what success had meant to other people in the past? I think that's critical too for any individual.
What are some strategies to help women advance within their organizations? Is there a single piece of advice you would give to that next generation of women leaders?
Workplace challenges for female are so different, industry by industry, country by country. But as an individual, I think for women, I think it's not to be afraid of creating your own set of priorities, and not being afraid to really voice the support that you need to make these priorities happen. And I think a lot of the women, women are so diverse, but a lot of the women that I've met are so humble and tend to be quieter with their own needs because, voicing their needs seems to be sometimes seen as a sign of weakness or a sign of neediness, unprofessional almost to voice. But I think if these are common needs shared by different female leaders, it's only right, and it's almost a responsibility for women who have the voice, women who are in the position of making different statements and being heard. It's a responsibility for such women to bring attention, I think, to the necessary support to make this society and make the particular organization more inclusive, because it benefits both the individuals and the corporations too. It's mutually beneficial. So it's not selfish. Is not being needy or unprofessional. And I think the more women who have a voice come together and bring attention to such necessary support, I think it will be an important continuation of all the work that's been put into gender equality so far. And I do think, especially as a professional woman, the term professional can have a lot of connotations to it that are, I think, inherently unfriendly to groups that had not been as dominant in professional spaces in the past. So women being one of them. Maybe there are in different industries, different groups, minority groups that have been marginalized or less dominant, less valued in the past. So I think for such groups, it's particularly important in a professional setting to see such act of voicing up as professional, as respectable, and as not selfish because you're doing, I think I see actually as a corporate social responsibility to really respond to these greater needs as well. Yeah.
How do you deal with office politics in any organization? There always seems to be a core group of untouchables. And Steve Jobs once said, in weak companies, politics win. In strong companies, best ideas do. What is your take on that?
Yeah. Well, I think I'm very, very lucky in that because TFT actually has a no politics culture. So we take a lot of action to ensure, it's not easy to just say, hey, no politics, because in some ways, being political is human. In some ways, politics don't necessarily stem from an evil place in our hearts. And sometimes it stems from just, some confusions. Sometimes it stems from misunderstanding. Sometimes it stems from the need to be recognized. Sometimes it stems from the fear of being judged for your opinion, etc. So, I don't think politics stem from an evil place. But we do not want the consequences of a very political workplace. We already have enough battle to be fought outside the organization, right? We have such a grand vision, and it requires all our attention, all our resources. We don't want to waste our energy and time internally that we don't have any energy left for the external vision and mission that is critical to us. So the no politics rule in TFT include a lot of deliberate practices. For example, we have a rule of not to be anonymous with our opinions. So whenever we do any questionnaire, whenever we have any, discussion on strategy or key decisions, it is assumed in the organization, it will be spelled out every time if there's an opportunity that if you have an opinion, you're encouraged not anonymously to speak up, whether your position is an intern or you're a director. It doesn't matter which position you stand in, your opinion is valued, but you need to voice up and own your opinion as well. So that's something that's deliberately practiced in our organization decisions and gatherings. Another deliberate practice that we do is if you have disagreement or confusion question for anybody, it is assumed that this particular person must go directly to the person of question in time, not to drag it on for too long, to directly voice such questions or disagreements with the person who's directly in charge. And so not to go behind a person to say, oh, I don't like that person because so-and-so, or because I disagree with that person because so-and-so. Going behind the person is very frowned upon in TFT. So if, sometimes it's easy to just want to grab a person next to you and just, say something else about another person. It's very normal to want to do that, but at least we have the culture of, if you hear such an opinion, you would encourage the person saying that to you to go directly to the person of question rather than to you. And I think that's something that we've built quite deeply into our culture to ensure that communication is direct, and there's not too much speculation or politics in different interest groups within the organization, right? So healthy confrontation, healthy communication. I think that's part of our DNA that we focus on continuing as well as the organization grows. So it's not easy to have a no politics role. I just listed a few examples as to what some of the deliberate practices as leaders and as members of the organization we need to continually remind each other of. But because of that, I'm relatively lucky that I don't deal with a lot of office politics on a daily basis. In general, I agree with what you quoted, when Steve Jobs said a great organization focuses on the ideas rather than each other's infighting. So that's what we sort of strive to be as well. We come together not to fight each other. We come together to really respond to a mission that had meant a lot to us even before joining the organization. So how do we focus on that? To be vision driven, be value driven, rather than sort of internal, individually driven. Yeah. So I think the last piece is, I think for our governance and for our decision making, it's never that An-Ting the chairperson says so and so. There's always something higher than the individual. It's not governed through individual will. It's governed through a collective community of different stakeholders. That for any decision is never coming from just one leader. Every decision needs to be examined through our core values, and taken into account voices and opinions from different parts of the organization. And it's only so that a decision will be made, right? So even, me personally, I hold, I guess, the highest ranked position in the organization, but even I could be challenged by an intern through core values, healthy confrontation, not confrontation to create harm, but confrontation to bring together healthy ideas. So I think to conclude, there is a quote put on the walls of one of the walls of TFT office by Martin Luther King Jr. I think there's beauty coming from opposites in creative syntheses. I think we constantly want to create creative syntheses, even with seemingly opposite ideas. We believe there are creative syntheses to be created, and that is beyond any individual. It's not about the position, it's about these values and the vision that drive us.
The Peter Drucker once said that culture is a strategy for breakfast.
Yes.
So the culture is a secret sauce that keeps employees and people motivated and clients happy. So in that sense, how would you describe the culture that you are building in Teach for Taiwan, as well as in rural areas while supporting youth?
I think that's a great question, sort of as a conclusive question almost to a lot of the questions that we've talked about so far. One of the cultures that we have is one that's built on trust. Community is built on trust. If there's no trust, there's no community, only maybe capable individuals. But we are a community. We are not just a collection of individuals. So to create a community, trust is essential. So, and comes before everything, right? So I think we're trying to build a culture that really prioritizes trust. And when trust is broken, in some cases, we are very proactive in rebuilding trust and in and really ensuring that we have practices in place that help us sustain trust as well. So that comes with trust, and in the front line, in our schools, with our local communities, that is very much the same. We are equal partners built on trust. It's never that there's one savior or one higher position organization coming to save the other organization or the other person. We're equal partners who trust each other, who have shared vision for what we're trying to do together. I think that's the value that we hold to our schools, to our corporate partners, to our public sector partners as well. Equal, collective, trustworthy relationships. So that's number one, trust. Number two, I think the culture we're trying to build is one that is at the same time warm, but also at the same time demanding, warm and demanding. It might seem like two a little opposite ideas at first glance, but we do appreciate these two ideas bring together for, as I said, a creative synthesis. Because in the classroom, that's what's required as well. A teacher needs to be warm and demanding. You cannot just be warm and with no expectation for your students, but you also cannot be only demanding, only marking your students through these different scores, but not warm in building meaningful relationships or valuing human interaction, right? So I think as an organization, we are very much aligned in that classroom philosophy too. That is essential for us to be both warm and demanding. Either one would not be sufficient. For example, we are a highly result-oriented and professional organization, which means we have high demands for our employees and for people who come to interview for a position in TFT. We wouldn't compromise such standards just because we want to be warm. We are demanding because we want to do our job well, and we are demanding of our quality. We're demanding of our professionalism. That's where we're demanding. But we're warm in that even for people who are, for example, for the time being rejected by TFT for a position, position, we ensure that we give them, in the process, a warm interaction, and not just smiling and being friendly, but also, for example, for any candidate that comes to our final round interview for our fellows, for our teachers, they each receive a personal care card, and that says just very concretely what are the attributes and competencies we've seen in them so far, and we encourage them really to thank themselves for being persistent in the process so far, but also whatever the results are, believe in themselves, in the ability to grow and become better, and even after the interviews, if they're not accepted, we host events where we invite them back to share where they are in their lives, and whether perhaps in a different time in their career, they're more suitable now to return to their organization in a more official capacity. So we are warm in that we don't judge people based on singular standards. I think each person is valuable. Each person is worth being treated with dignity. We are warm in that belief, while not compromising at all our professional standards. So I think the second culture is warm and demanding. And I think finally, I've also mentioned the culture is very vision and core value driven. So if there's always difficult decisions, difficult situations, if there's any of these situations that arise, that really there are different ideas and opinions of what we should do, and really even the leaders don't have the correct answers, we have to take some risks. I think especially in these difficult decisions and situations, what the vision truly means and what the values truly mean to the organization would really be evident if most organizations have a vision statement, have a mission statement, and have some core values. But if for such an organization, vision, mission, core values is something that you print on the walls for political correctness, or maybe just it's been passed down in tradition but not been renewed in the current mindset of the organizations, then in such situations, people will not look to them for guidance, right? But for TFT, what we do is, especially when we are confused, especially when we are challenged, we look to our vision and mission and core values for guidance. What would our action mean in relation to our vision, in relation to our mission, in relation to our core values? And does not mean that the correct answer surfaced right away. It does not mean that people stop having any disagreement, but it does mean that whatever decision is made, we have a common source and language of direction, of inspiration. And I think in the longer term, that creates an organization that's beyond any individual, that could be sustained and passed on through different leaders and through different challenges as well. So I think that's the third and final piece I will mention, which is that it is a vision-driven and value-driven culture that we try to ensure, particularly in difficult decisions and times. Yeah.
Which traits do you think that all effective leaders should possess? And do you have any important leadership lesson that you can share with us in your career so far?
Every leader should really work on being even more authentic and humble as we progress in our leadership journeys. Because being authentic and humble might not have been hard at the beginning of our careers, at the beginning of our journeys. I think, if you look around, younger people, I think automatically, usually, are more authentic, are more humble, because they know that they might not have the right answer. They know that they might not have the right experiences, and because they have still that childlike quality of being authentic with each other. As we move on in our careers and lives, I think those attributes become sometimes overlooked. And because we sometimes can be led into the false illusion as we progress in our career. For example, now I have a big sounding title, right? I'm a chairperson of an organization. I think sometimes that creates the illusion that I'm always right. I have all the answers, that I have the most experience out of the people around me, and that I should be respected for all these reasons, cannot be challenged, and that people look up to me to learn rather than I look to people to learn. So I think for me, constantly in my leadership trajectory, I think just because how easy it is to overlook these important attributes in leadership, that I have to pay extra attention to ensure that as I mature as a leader, I don't unconsciously or subconsciously become less authentic and less humble, because that, I think, would corrode the true strength of a leader and the true purpose of a leader as well. So even now, I put extra emphasis in my own leadership that am I humble enough? Am I open enough? Am I learning? And am I authentic? Even though in my position, I have a lot of considerations. Authenticity brings strength in leadership. And so how do I really practice authenticity that will sustain me as an individual, but also sustain the team that I'm leading as well, right? So I think authentic and humble are the two attributes that in my own journey are most critical and need to be most deliberate about as well.
Thank you for sharing your insights on your work and on female leadership. Viewers, thank you for watching this P Talk. Before closing, I would like to share a quote from Simon Sinek. Leaders are the ones who are willing to give up something of their own for us, their time, their energy, their money, maybe even the food off their plate. When it matters, leaders choose to eat last. Please stay well, both mentally and physically, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, you're going to miss out on a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.